Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Susan Tan. I am a Boston-based children's book writer. I have 2 books out right now. Cilla Lee Jenkins' Future Author Extraordinaire was my debut novel. It came out in 2017, and it's a semi-autobiographical series based on my own experiences growing up in a mixed-race family and having a lot of adventures with my family and loving to write and to read. And then the second book in the series, Cilla Lee Jenkins, this book is a classic, and it's named because in the first book, she wants to be a best-selling future author extraordinaire. In the second book, she decides where can you go from, a bestseller, well, a classic. So in this book is a classic. It takes place a year later, and it continues Cilla's adventures. And then the third book, Cilla Lee Jenkins, The Epic Story, so you can again see where she's going with this. The Epic Story comes out March 29th, 2019. And the Cilla books are sort of based, the first book begins when Cilla is 8 years old and finds out she's getting a new younger sister. And she is not happy about this at all. She's been an only child her entire life. And she decides that the only way to deal with this news is to write her first ever best-selling novel now before the baby's born, so no one in her family can forget how great she is. So that's the plan. In the second book, as you can kind of see by the cover, spoiler alert, the baby sister comes and she's fine with it. In the second book is more concerned with traditions and family traditions. In this book, Cilla is asked to be a bridesmaid at her aunt's wedding, and it's a Chinese wedding. And Cilla, who's half Chinese, begins to really worry about if she's Chinese enough, and if she knows all of the traditions and everything she needs in order to be the perfect flower girl. So she sets out to learn every Chinese tradition she possibly can. And then in the third book, in Cilla Lee Jenkins' The Epic Story, this is actually a slightly older book. It takes place 2 years later, so she's in 5th grade. She's worried about middle school. She has 2 sisters, another spoiler alert. But also her yeye, which is the Chinese word for grandfather, has a stroke. And this is something based on my life and what happened to me, and he's absolutely fine. And whenever I talk to kids, I say, it's okay, he's fine, he's fine. However, her yeye, very much like my grandfather, speaks both English and Chinese. And when he has the stroke, he loses much of his English. He retains a lot of the Chinese language skills, but this is very common in someone who suffers a stroke. So in Cilla Lee Jenkins' The Epic Story, which I wish I had the cover to show you, but it's not, I don't have a hard copy yet, Cilla decides that her epic quest is to teach her yeye English again. So that's what she sets out to do over the course of the book. Just to tell you a little bit about how I came to write. So I actually didn't think I wanted to write children's books. I always loved children's books, and my first ever job was in the children's room of the Concord Public Library in Concord, Massachusetts. And so I love children's books, but when I went to college, I sort of directed that love into studying English. And I thought, oh, I love children's books, I'll study them. So I actually went to grad school to study children's literature. And it was sort of at the very end of grad school, kind of when you don't want to be having this revelation, I realized that I didn't think academia was for me in my last year or so. And I realized that I really wanted to write children's books. So I started writing. I started writing Cilla, the first book, at night. What I would do is I'd be writing my dissertation during the day, and then I would close my laptop at night, and I would just need to sort of unwind. I would be really stressed by it. So I would get into bed, get ready for bed, get my pajamas on, turn off the light, take out my iPad, lie down, and I would write lying down, upside down on my iPad, typing with my thumbs. And every night I would write more of this story. And so it began very much as an escape for me and very rapidly morphed into a book, which kind of took me by surprise. So now I sort of get to live in both worlds, which is really, really fun. So I'm a postdoctoral teaching fellow at Ames, Boston, and I specialize in children's and young adult literature, but also teach general literature courses, and then I also write. So that's kind of an introduction of who I am and where I'm coming from. And I know today is sort of billed as a Q&A, so if you have questions, I'd love to answer them. And or if there's anything you're interested in knowing about, I can also go on and on about all things children's literature. So, yes?
Well, you say that part of your biography is deciding to write when you were 8 years old.
Yes.
And when I think back, I think it's only recently that I came to the realization that people had to write books in order for them to be. Mostly I considered that they were, just there.
Me too.
Yes. And so, what accounts for your realization that there's a person behind the book?
Ooh, I love that question. Thank you. So I guess I should say two things. One is that one of the stories actually in the first Scylla, many of the stories are based on real life and then embellished or changed a great deal. But actually one of the truest stories in Scylla is about difficulties learning to read. So when I was a kid, I had a very, very hard time learning to read. And in fact, in first grade, and part of it was because I moved around a lot as a child, so at different schools, you know, one school might be learning the alphabet at one time and the other might already be on writing, and I would sort of be behind. But I have this really vivid memory the first day of first grade when the teacher wrote something on the board, and it was probably welcome to, you know, Miss Stroud's first grade class, and I couldn't read it at all. And I was literally copying shapes, kind of hunched over my paper, worried that other people would see and would know that that I was stupid, right? That I couldn't do it. So I say this because I think reading for me was this really loaded thing. I loved stories and I really wanted to do it, but I couldn't. So I think that made me almost hyper-focus on all the elements that went into a book, if that makes sense. So I think I didn't necessarily think about books as kind of just magic items that were there. And I think it was because I had a really hard time accessing them. So I was fascinated with how you write a book and kind of what that is. And how stories get made. And I remember too very clearly learning that sort of authors wrote multiple books and thinking, wow, where did they get that idea? Why did they do that? And it's just very funny because the first book I ever fully read by myself was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which was, so that was when I finally did it. That was the victory. But I think too that being introduced, sort of wanting to read and then finally getting to read through a series book, it made me really, really focused on authors. And this idea of, wow, this dude, C.S. Lewis, he was cool. Wow, he wrote so many of these books. So just to answer that question, I think you're absolutely right that I think that if I hadn't had those difficulties, I wouldn't have really thought about authors writing. But to be honest, even now, because I think that even now when I write new things, I forget that writing is this really messy process, kind of what you say, it's a process with a person kind of banging their head against a computer or typewriter for a long time. And sometimes I think it's easy to forget, to just think, oh my gosh, how do other writers do it? How did J.K. Rowling know exactly what to say in every line of Harry Potter to make it perfect, the first draft? And I have to remind myself, like, oh right, that's not how it works. But so thank you, I love that question. I've never been asked it before. Any other questions? Yes?
So, how do you know how much to stretch? Your reader is probably 9, 10 years old. Mm-hmm. So how do you know when you can say things that they might not be able to get? Some would be able to get, but most kids have to be 14 to get. And yet, you have to reach them, but you don't want to pretend they're second graders.
Right.
How do you find that right balance of stretching them and reaching them and not? But how does that happen?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question, and one I should say that the first part of the answer is that I have a wonderful team of editors who really help me. I have a really great team of people who give me excellent feedback in sort of thinking about this, because you're absolutely right. That's a huge focus when writing for children. And I guess I have a couple different answers to that. So one of the inspirations for writing Scylla as a particular story, and something that really drives all of my writing, comes from the fact that as a kid, I didn't have a lot of books with characters who looked like me, or who had experiences that even came close to mirroring my own. And I remember very vividly the experience of finding a children's book with a mixed-race Asian character and just being blown away. It was some sort of like, it never occurred to me that this kind of story could exist. And I say this because when I read that story, there were things articulated that to me felt like, it felt like this author had looked into my soul and seen the secret things that only that I thought I was the only one who ever thought about this. The fact that I might feel out of place in Chinatown because I was really self-conscious that I didn't speak Chinese and worried I wasn't Chinese enough, or that I felt conscious in other non-Chinese contexts, sort of for the reverse reasons. Equally so, and so I say that because that was a moment where a book really, really grabbed me, and really sort of articulated things for me that I didn't quite have the language yet to put into words for myself. So kind of with that idea of stretching. And for me, that was a really positive moment of stretching, and something in the book community we would call mirrors, and the idea that you need books that mirror your experiences and affirm your humanity in certain ways. So kind of that being said, you're absolutely right that in a book, there are always going to be moments that you don't know if all readers are going to get. And the first ever moment, the first ever scene I wrote in Scylla has to do with this, Scylla having an encounter with a stranger in a grocery store who asks, "What are you?" And this is a really, really common thing for mixed race kids or racially ambiguous kids, and strangers will just come up to you and usually like pet you or touch you and be like, "Oh, you're so exotic looking, what are you?" It's usually, it's great. And it's one of those things that especially as an adult, you can step back and say, okay, this is a well-meaning question, but at the same time, right, it's othering a person. It's making them into a what and they're a who. And also, we need to think about why do you need to ask this question? Why do you need to come over and if you're fascinated with someone, there's some objectification there that we need to interrogate. But as a kid, of course, right, you just sort of think like, wow, adults are weird, right? And they're asking me these questions and I'm supposed to answer because I'm taught that you have to be polite to adults and answer their questions. So basically in this moment, I've been asked this "what are you" question all my life from childhood, and I'm still asked it now through to adulthood. And the answer now is awesome because I can actually say an author or a professor, which is great, just shuts it down. But I got that from the book because in the book, I imagined a moment when a little girl gets to misunderstand the question and in doing so reclaim it. So the woman says, "What are you?" And Scylla thinks, "Oh my God, no one has ever asked me this before. I have to get it right." And she goes through a list of, well, what do I want to be? What's exciting enough? And she decides, okay, I'm only 5, because this is sort of in a flashback scene. I'm only 5, but if I have to pick now, I'll be a future literary genius. That is what it will be. And so she gets to take it back. And the reason I bring it up is because this is a scene that in many ways to me is this powerful reclamation of a question, an idea. But for some readers, right, that fact doesn't register at all. And I think that's okay. For me, I think that that's just a moment that I really think about in terms of who understands what. Older readers, and I've found a lot of younger readers, particularly readers who have a similar background, get it immediately. And they get the satisfaction of saying, yeah, the next time an adult comes over to me and asks a dumb question, I'm going to give it right back, and I'm going to answer it honestly in a way that's honest for me. But I think for kids who don't get it, right, they just read the scene and think, oh, awesome. Right? Okay, she's a future author extraordinaire, She found her destiny by the gumball machine at the grocery store, Live your life, right? Interesting moment. So I don't think that kids need to understand every single thing that happens in a book, as long as there's an engaging story and characters that can bring them along regardless. And in fact, I think that's part of the beauty of children's books, because children's books are often reread at various stages. And I think that that's part of it, that literally for kids can often grow alongside the books and get to sort of read it initially, and maybe they don't understand they don't understand some of these undercurrents that are going on, and maybe they revisit later and suddenly realize that those were there. So for me, I kind of almost love those moments, as long, again, as kids can be drawn along in them. But I really do love those moments when everyone can be on different pages, and that's okay, and different levels of understanding, and that's okay. So sorry, that was a long tangential answer to your question, but thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So why did you choose fiction, not nonfiction?
Ooh. Excellent question. I think because I find fiction more fun, to be totally honest. One of the things I find so satisfying about writing Scylla is, and then there's no other way to put it really, is sort of the wish fulfillment of kind of thinking about really powerful moments for me in my life, and then thinking about what I wish could have been said, right? Or thinking about ways that maybe at the time I experienced something, and some of these moments are not great moments, but moments where you experience something and sort of looking back, you wish you had the language to go deeper. And it kind of goes right back to the childhood question. When you're 8 and something really negative happens, it's hard to have the language to, to say, if something like that happened now, I could say, okay, let's take a step back and think about, what's been said here, right? As an 8-year-old, you don't necessarily have that ability or the power or the words to do that. So with Scylla, I think I would take stories from my life, and part of the joy was going back and saying, okay, what would have been nice? What would have been a nice conversation to have with those kids who bullied me? Or what would have been sort of an interesting thing to explore? Or how could I have thought about where they were coming from? Things like that.
Quick repartee, but not a day later, you can just...
No, exactly, yes. When you have the perfect answer for an argument 5 hours later, and you think, oh, okay, next time, right? So I think that's what I enjoy. That's what I enjoy about fiction versus nonfiction. And to be honest too, I do feel like it is really interesting to me because I think the joy of inventing characters, but also particularly children's characters, is that there's a real sort of fun and whimsy to them that I kind of wish I could inhabit all the time. So I think that's another reason I write fiction versus nonfiction, because I just really enjoy seeing the world through that lens. All the time, and so writing them is a real joy as well.
And is that why you chose children's literature rather than adults?
Yeah, great question. That is definitely a part of it. So I think I mentioned I worked in a children's room of the library as a middle schooler. And so I've always been drawn to children's literature, and actually this feels very appropriate to say in kind of the haunted house decor, but I had a really funny, neat moment where in 8th grade, in my 8th grade yearbook, they gave us all destinies, and most of them were really silly, like, Chris is going to be a ninja, I don't even know, Cindy's going to be, an actress on Saturday Night Live, but mine was children's book writer, and I kind of had this moment of thinking, hey, that makes so much sense. And so I actually think that kind of that coupled with my love of children's books put that in my head. And now I wouldn't rule out writing in other genres, and especially I might write in young adult literature, but I really enjoy writing for kids as an audience. I find it really gratifying both to inhabit sort of a child's perspective and point of view, but I love the community surrounding children's literature, and I love working with children. So for now at least, that's probably where I'll stay. But I'm flexible. I sort of feel like, don't hold me to that. 5 years later, I might have a really different answer. Yes, other questions? Yeah.
Can you talk about the first publishing process, how you found a publisher? Do you illustrate your books? How did you go about that for a beginner?
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. This is one of my favorite things to answer, just because I think that the publishing industry can be really intimidating and can seem really, I think sometimes, it seems vast, and sometimes I think it's hard to know where to start, and it's a very intimidating thing. And I firmly believe that everyone should write stories and get them seen. And I'll just hold on to Scylla so you can, with the illustrator stuff. So I found a publishing house through an agent. And if you're interested in writing, I would recommend getting an agent, because your agent is basically the person, they do a couple things. So they're usually the first people to see your manuscript. Agents now actually take on a very big editorial role. So when I got my agent we edited the draft of Scylla about 3 times, which was a shock, because I thought, yay, I have an agent, it's done, right? Let's go on. And then, 3 months later, we're still revising. But an agent will also advocate for you. So they'll advocate for you legally, so they'll read through your contracts, they'll sort of make sure they have a sense of the industry, and they can just sort of make sure that you're being protected. But they can also protect your interests, and I think that's really important. I have a wonderful editor, so my agent has never needed to step in with my editor, but my agent has had to step in, for example, with other copies of Scylla. So Scylla, I sold foreign rights in Germany. And the edition of, and I should have brought it, the German edition of Scylla, it's really cool. But initially in the illustrations, they whitewashed all the characters. And I can show you some examples in here, but so Scylla is mixed race, her best friend Colleen is black, and her school is a very diverse school. And in the German edition, they were all white and blonde. And I was really upset, and there was little I could do until my agent stepped in. And sort of that's where your agent is there to just advocate for you and to say, look, I know this is important, right? You can't always get everything you want in publishing, but you can pick your hills to die on. And I thought this was a pretty fair hill for me to die on in this case. And so he emailed them, and through his mediation, they changed the illustrations. But so all this to say, I highly recommend getting an agent, because your agent is also the person who knows people in the industry and will get you read. Because editors in the publishing industry today have a huge, they're sort of always swimming in material. They always have, they always have stacks of manuscripts on their desks or in their inboxes. Yeah, exactly.
You don't want to get lost in that.
Exactly. And your agent, part of your agent's job is making connections with editors. And so they can call them and say, hey, I got this manuscript, it made me think of you. You should take a look. So that just gets you bumped up the pile and read. In terms of getting an agent, my answer is truly cyber stalking, which I say that the way I would suggest it is to read widely in your field, and to find books that you like and that have the feel of the book that you're interested in creating. And then you cyberstalk that person's agent. And so I found a book series that I really loved. So I Googled who is this person's agent, and then I found my agent. And the thing is, agents, especially if they are open to new clients, they want to be found. So they have, my agent had blog interviews, had trade interviews, had a website, and it's all about, here's what I'm looking for, here's what I want. Do you have this story? Do you have that story? And so looking at that and reading what he wanted, it was so funny because it read like a checklist for my book. And he said, I'm the, I think it was something like the second oldest of 9 kids. I want stories about families that think about families in new ways and think about sibling relationships. And I thought, hey, the check, right? I have that. So sort of going down the list, I saw that we were a really great fit. And so I queried him. And querying is when you essentially write an email letter to an agent, sort of telling them about your book. And there's some great resources out there, especially a blog called Query Shark. And which is, I love that name, but basically blogs all about sort of how to package yourself to an agent. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff out there. I think it's just knowing where to start, and I think an agent is a good point. And then my agent recommended me pretty immediately to my editor, Connie Hasu, who became the editor for Scylla. And just a note kind of about how the whole process works too in illustration. So, I'm just opening this, I don't know if you can see. So that's Dana Wolfcott, my illustrator. And what was so wonderful, so Connie is, first off, an incredible editor, really, really supportive. She's also Asian American, and Dan, my agent, knew that was very important to me in the sense that this is really an Asian American story, and I didn't want the story to be whitewashed or to sort of lose the culture and background that makes the main character who she is. And then Connie came in, sort of helped me take the story to amazing new heights. And then she said, okay, I really want you to have an Asian American illustrator. I want it to be an Asian American woman, right? And we're just gonna, we're gonna all work together to make this possible. So she got me Dana, who's incredible. And I just wanna see if I can find you an well, I guess you can see the cover, which is all Dana's work. But Dana, oh dear. Oh, here we go. This is a good one. Dana is a beautiful illustrator. This is Scylla being sad because she's struggling to learn how to read, to bring it back to the first question. And this is her dad comforting her here. So we really worked together as a team. And just to give you a sense too, when they first sketched Scylla's dad, he was very sweet looking. But he didn't look like this. He was very lovely looking, but I wrote back and I said, I really like him, and weirdly he kind of looked like my own dad. I felt like, how did you do that? And I said, so I love this, but if I could have, one wish, and you can just dismiss it, but Asian men in the media are usually not portrayed as particularly handsome, right? And I just sort of wondered if, I just would love to amp up his handsome factor a little. And Dana was like, oh my gosh, and now he's Asian Superman, and I love it. It makes me so happy, right? So just a small thing. Oh shoot, yeah. Oh, it didn't spell, phew, sorry. So just a small thing about, kind of how that process works. So, but I would really say if you're interested in publishing, the agent is a great place to start. And then your agent can help you get a sense of houses and the publisher, your different publishing options.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. I can write some of these down for you later. I know that was a lot of stuff, but if you want, I can write down the blogs for you later.
It's interesting. I'm sorry.
Okay. When you were choosing an agent, did you choose from a list, or did you just go to one agent and you were happy with that one choice?
It's a great question. So the way you should do it is through a list. So what I've always been told is have your list and have your sort of top 5. So do it by tier. So you have your top 5, and then your next, the second tier of top 5, third tier of top 5. And I've been told that that's a great way to approach it because you can submit to the top 5, wait to hear back from all of them, right? And it's also great. The cool thing about agents is it's kind of free editorial advice. Oftentimes agents will be very encouraging, and even if they say to you, look, it's not, I love the idea, but the character wasn't developed enough for me. If all the agents you've emailed, all 5 of them say that, then you sort of know, oh, okay, maybe I need to amp up the character. So it's just a nice way to get some feedback and get going. But I say that because I got very lucky. So I was going to do that, but I had this dream agent in my head, and I just couldn't. I was making my list, but I just couldn't get past the idea that I really wanted him. So I figured, you know what, I'm just going to query him, and then he's going to get back to me and reject me, and then I'll go to the list and I'll do it the responsible way. And then he became my agent. But that was an unusual, just very lucky thing. But I also think it came from us being such a good fit, again, because I had cyberstalked him. Yeah, but that's a great question. So I would say that's a great way to approach it. Did you have?
Oh, I was just struck by your very deliberate approach to dealing with stereotypes that you encountered, and importing that into your book, the way things were, the way things should be.
Yeah, thank you. That's a beautiful way to put that. And were you just?
Well, when I think back to what I was like as an 8-year-old, I don't think I would have noticed. But going back to the book, as a 12-year-old, I may have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love how you put that too, because that's absolutely kind of what I think about a lot in my writing. That, of course, there's write what you know, right? And actually Scylla riffs on that a lot in here. The whole premise is that she wants to write her first ever best-selling novel. People told her to write what she knows. She has decided she will, and the thing she knows best is herself. So that's why she's sort of telling her story. And I just find it so interesting, though, because of course there's truth in that you want to write about authentic emotions, and I think everything, I think back to C.S. Lewis or Tolkien, right? There's real, love and grief and hardship and all, there are very real feelings there that you can imagine they knew, right? But then this happens in a fantasy world. But so I'm very much behind write what you know, but I am also a huge proponent of write the world you want to see. And I think that write what you know can sometimes get a bit thorny because oftentimes people think, okay, well I need to write the world as I know it, and they end up recreating just sort of some of the same old problems in a world. And of course that's important in some books, but I'm a really big proponent of how can I write things that I wish the world looked like, and especially for children's literature. It's such a privilege to know that and actually it's kind of still mind-blowing to me that it's such a privilege to know that people are bringing my story into their homes to their children who are, if you think about a parent who's reading this to their 6 or 7-year-old, that feels like such a wonderful gift and a wonderful thing to do. I mean, to have the chance to kind of in some way influence a child's imaginative world and at such a young and influential stage in their lives. So that's absolutely what I think about, particularly with children's literature. Like, what kind of world would I like to see, and what kind of stories would I like to tell kids about the kind of world that is possible? So I just love how you put that, because that's definitely a big thing for me.
Has Scylla ever done anything that surprised you, or has she ever done anything that you didn't want her to do and you couldn't stop her?
All the time. That's such a great question. I'm trying to think. I don't know. Oh yeah, actually yeah. So So this character surprises me all the time. And that's part of the joy of writing her, and why it's been really hard to try to write something new that's not in the series, because I find the voice comes so easily and is so kind of rambunctious that it will run rampant in my head, and I'm writing someone new, and I feel like, okay, it has to be different. But absolutely, in terms of things that, not that I didn't want her to do, but that I wasn't expecting, in this book, actually, there's a whole segment about how you kind of accidentally hurt people you love. And here it's told very much in the elementary school context of your friend is making a new friend and you're not happy. So, but as human beings, right, you kind of lash out at both the new friend and at your old friend. But it's just very funny you say that, because things like that, it hadn't even occurred to me. And it was literally just typing the scene and thinking, who's on the playground? And then something really mean came out. And I was like, Scylla, no, that's so unfair, oh my God. But it turned into such a rich vein of the story, this idea of, we think mean things about other people, and it's really hard, and then you have to apologize and acknowledge that you were wrong. So so those things have happened, definitely, on certain scales. I don't know how much time we have left. Do we have?
The word is yours.
It's fine. Any other questions?
How long does it take? You hear variations of times with the authors. One may take 10 years depending on what's going on in their life. What is the best way you find to balance everything and juggle everything and get it done in a, not a 10-year time frame?
It is a great question, and one I feel I'm still developing an answer to. I always recommend Stephen King's On Writing. I don't know if any of you have ever read that, but it's his book on the writing process, and I really love it. I mean, he's Stephen King, so it's, and for him you have to take it with a grain of salt, because he'll be like, if you can't write a book in 3 months, and you think, okay, you're Stephen King, like, I'm not, maybe someday. It's funny, because I just think the answer varies. So with my first book, it took me about, I would say, 3 months to write the first draft, just sort of, but just really loose. And then I would say 9 months to write a revised sort of fuller book. But then I spent about a year revising. So I would say and that was before I went to my editor and agent, where I had to revise again. So I would say it was about 2 years to get the book to a place where I was really happy with it. But also that was my first book. So this book I wrote in 9 months because I was on a deadline, and that happens with writers. You spend all this time on your first book, and then all of a sudden with the second one, they're like, great, this is going to come out in March 2018, so chop chop. You think, oh my gosh. And then the same with the third. So what I would say, and then it's hard. It's funny too, because so now I've written 3 books. But now I'm trying to write something new, and I'm kind of back to this phase, and now I'm working full time. So this has been a really interesting, difficult, but I'm sort of trying to suss out the balance of how do I work full time, ignore all the piles of grading I have to do, and try to write a new book. What I would say, I think just the best way to think about time is not necessarily through a timeline, but in terms of just making the time to sit and keep moving forward. Because what I would say first is that I really think that the real work of writing is in revising. Right. So even if you have 100 pages of what you look at and you say, this is the worst, it's literally just, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. That's still 100 pages of words to revise, and that's amazing. So that's what I try to remind myself, because sometimes I feel this need to be a perfectionist, and I'll keep going back and tweaking things, and I say, no, just keep going, even if it's literally, and then she went to the cave, and then she fought the dragon, right? And then, and then this happened, then this happened, then this happened at the end.
Creative.
Exactly.
You don't want to kill the creative process.
Yeah, and you just want to get it out, because I think that's when, it's kind of when you go back and you're revising that you think, oh, I know she's going to get to the dragon in the end, but this is a really great opportunity to show the character through the friend she makes, things like that. So I would say, get your story out. Just don't put too much pressure on yourself. I like to I write, I wish I brought it. I write on a Neo, don't know if any of you know this, it's what third graders use. So it literally is, it's a keyboard with a window that's this big, that's where you can see the text. And the text, it's like a TI-85 calculator. It's actually for elementary schoolers because their teachers want them to type but don't want them to be able to go online. So it's if you don't want your kids to have iPads. And so it makes it, you can scroll back, but you have to type up with an arrow key and you can only see 3 lines. So if you want to go back, it's like, oh, where is it? So I love writing on this because I can't go back and over tweak. So I use that as sort of a tool to just make myself keep moving forward. And so again, at the end of a few months, I'll load it all onto my computer. And again, it's probably really not great, but it's words. And that's what matters. And that's when you can go back and revise. Exactly.
The discipline of revision.
Yeah.
What are we trying to say? How are we trying to say it?
Right.
How many pages?
Exactly. And because you've taken a step back, it's the weirdest feeling ever when you realize that you're bored in your own scene. Like I'll read something and be like, oh, I'm so bored. This is absurd. This character is so tiresome. And I'll think, oh, okay, I'm the writer, so I can cut this. Or I can make something interesting happen. Like this is a sign that something needs to happen. So absolutely, I think once you get distance, then you can come back and really begin to get really creative in new ways.
So you find that sometimes you just have to put it down a minute.
Yeah.
And step away. So
Yeah.
you come back refreshed with new eyes, new mind.
Exactly.
New you.
Exactly.
Okay, I believe in
Yeah.
that too. Yeah.
And just with juggling too, because I know life is busy for all of us, what I try to remind myself is that it is shocking how much you can get done in 20 minutes. I do a lot of writing because I wrote this book when I was finishing my dissertation, which was a stupid idea in retrospect. But I would write at night and I would write on the bus on the way to the library, and I write a lot on my phone. So I'll just it looks like I'm playing Candy Crush or something, okay? Write on my phone. So now I often write on the way to work, or I'll do something, maybe in my notebook, I'll make myself free write just kind of on the T, or in between student meetings, or even for 20 minutes in the morning. So, and it's just funny because you do it and you think, oh, 20 minutes, what can I get done then? But it kind of helps because you have to do it so quickly that you're not in your head kind of second guessing yourself. And then at the end of the week, I'll look and I'll think, oh, hey, wow, that's actually a lot of work that I did, over 20 minutes just a day. So that's what I would just say too, that I think there's a vision of a writer. I actually talk about this with kids at school visits a lot. I show them a picture of Charles Dickens at his desk, and he's like this. And it's just really funny because I say, what is this? They're all like, a writer, and how do you know? And it's, because he's serious, and because he's, at his desk, and he's a pen, it's a feather, and no pot shots at Charles Dickens. I love Charles Dickens. But we talk about the fact that that's not what a writer has to be, and I think that's just so important because we live in a world now where oftentimes you can't do that, and that's the other thing too. It's hard to be a full-time writer if you're not a writer already, and even when you are a writer, you have to work still. So I just think, I think it's important to know that you can sort of, oftentimes the writers are people who are doing it while working other jobs or several other jobs or raising kids or all these things, and I have friends who work jobs and have babies right now, and they literally just write during nap time, like standing up on a pad, and I think you're amazing. Yes, that's just what I would say.
Maybe we think you get paid by the word.
Yes, no, that's exactly right. So he was thinking about all the money coming in, right? All the other words to add.
What was your thesis?
Oh, my thesis was on contemporary young adult dystopian literature. It's actually really, it was on young adult dystopian literature, contemporary, and it's just really funny because it was on kind of representations of history and national history, which in dystopias are really violent, and a really kind of violent critique of current society and various elements of the world. But so it was really funny because when I told my friends at grad school that I was writing a children's book, they were all kind of like, do you know that you can't put really violent things in a children's book, right? And I would say, no, it's totally different. I'm really different as a writer than as an academic, I swear. So.
Well, when you talk about the positive world you want to see, it's almost the dystopia. This is a utopia.
Yeah.
You're framing it that way. So maybe all that dystopia is like, okay,
how can we make the world better?
I was in a dystopia. That kind of thing.
Oh my gosh, I've never considered that before. Thank you. That's amazing. That's absolutely true.
Just Susan, your third book is getting published, you said,
Yes.
shortly. Can you tell us a little about that so that
Absolutely.
with that?
Yeah, and I know I mentioned it a bit at the beginning, but so in this third book, Scylla's in 5th grade. She's 2 siblings now. And in this story, she, sort of as it begins, she's really nervous about going to middle school. She has a lot of very age-appropriate fears. And there are also just kind of, kids are beginning to grow up. She's worried that she's kind of not cool enough for her friend group anymore. And this is also an age when a lot of, for example, sort of pressures regarding gender norms are beginning to really kind of set in. So she's sort of grappling with all of these things. But then also in the book, she, as I mentioned before, her grandfather has a stroke and is okay. He's totally okay. But he loses motor function and he was bilingual in Chinese and English, and he loses much of his English, which happened to my grandfather. So Scylla, in her epic quest, decides that she is going to go on an epic quest to teach him English again. And I feel I should say too that probably, as is clear, right, that's not going to be the easy journey she expects, nor is it necessarily going to be a successful journey. And a big part of the book is her sort of learning that their relationship can still exist, right, without language, right? And this idea of sort of thinking about the ways we relate to people and show care for people. So that's a big thrust of the book. Though there are also kind of in true Scylla fashion, there are a lot of other side adventures happening. And I would actually just say in all these books that I really wanted to write a child character who gets to experience both the serious and non-serious elements of her world, which is kind of how we all experience it, right? You know, we all sort of, for example, in the first book, you know, Scylla's thinking about her identity and background and racial identity. That's a huge and important part of what comprises her, but that's not the only thing. And part of the story is her getting to decide to just think about all the elements that make up her life and narrative. So all this to say, I just feel like the third book sounds really serious, and there are also adventures with tubas, and dogs, and a runaway frog. Oh no, actually the runaway frog isn't here, sorry. Oh no, I can't. There's peacocks, robber peacocks. Yeah, there's a big balance between sort of the madcap adventures she goes on and then also the larger serious narrative. So that is book 3. So
Looking forward to it very much.
Thank
and
you.
everyone, next year, same time.
yes, but we'll go to the Halloween party first. That's my new plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.